Are you trying to destroy yourself? Dr. Ross's voice cut through the thick silence of the upscale internal medicine clinic in Chicago. It wasn't the gentle kind of questioning you'd expect from a physician. It came out almost like a reflexive outburst. He slammed the patient file down on the desk, the lab results still trembling from the impact. Across from him, Darius, a high-profile CEO in the finance world, sat with a slight lean in his chair, a faint smirk on his lips. In his dark navy suit, perfectly knotted tie, and polished shoes that looked like they'd just left an important boardroom, he hardly resembled a patient being scolded by a doctor. Darius drawled, "Dr. Ross, you're starting to worry me. Talk like that. You'd think I was a stage 4 cancer case." "You know exactly what your problem is," Ross said, his words clipped and sharp. "The amount of alcohol you're drinking will destroy your liver. Keep it up, and you won't live to see your youngest graduate." Darius tilted his head slightly, a glint of mockery in his eyes. "Really? And you want me to believe that you are completely immune to what alcohol makes you feel? I don't buy it. A man in your line of work, pressure, long shifts, watching pain play out every single day, you expect me to believe you've never reached for a drink to numb that mess?" The question landed like a blade, striking the softest spot in Ross's armor. Ross blinked. Just for a moment, but long enough for Darius to see he'd hit a nerve. Leaning back in his chair, arms folded, Darius wore the look of someone who'd just scored a point. "Alcohol isn't just a liquid, doctor. It's a doorway to someplace soft, where the noise stops and every wound is wrapped in fog. Everyone thinks they can step back out whenever they want. Until they realize the door's gone. You're sure you've never gotten lost in there?" Ross gripped the pen in his hand so tightly his fingers went white. He fought to keep his voice steady, even as his heart hammered. Darius's question wasn't just a provocation, it was holding up an invisible mirror. And in that mirror, Ross saw himself. A few minutes earlier. Darius had entered the exam room with the presence of a man who never let himself come out second best in any meeting. He gave a polite smile, his handshake firm. "Dr. Ross, here we are again, time for the regular checkup." Ross nodded, shook his hand, and gestured toward the desk. "You've been well?" "Fine," Darius replied quickly, settling into the chair across from him. "Just one drink every night to relax. I've got it under control." He said it as if it were nothing, too trivial to even be worth noting in his file. Ross didn't answer right away. He flipped to the lab results, his eyes stopping on the liver enzyme levels. High, very high. Alongside them was a blood alcohol reading that couldn't possibly have come from one drink. He'd seen enough patients to know when he was being lied to, and this time he knew for certain because it was the same lie he told himself. Ross drank more than one drink every night. On evenings when he wasn't on call, after the kids were in bed and the house had gone quiet, he would pour himself a glass, then another, not to get drunk, but to switch off the noise in his head. He was a good doctor, a devoted father, but also a sensitive man who carried with him a nameless exhaustion. The critical cases, the defeated looks in families' eyes, the clipped words spoken in stress, all of it clung to him, settling like residue he could never scrub away. Work at the hospital was already a daily battle. At home, there was another one, raising 2 teenagers, trying to keep the pressures of the hospital from seeping into the dinner table. He loved his children, loved his work, but often felt trapped between 2 worlds that both demanded everything he had. And alcohol made it all go quiet, at least for a few hours. Looking at Darius now, Ross felt the unsettling weight of the parallel between them. Still, he braced his hands on the desk, leaning slightly toward Darius. "This isn't about me, it's about you. You're paying me to tell you the truth. And the truth is, if you don't stop, you're going to destroy yourself." Darius shrugged. "Maybe, but I'm not paying to be lectured on how to live by someone who thinks he's perfect." A flush of heat rose in Ross's chest. He drew in a deep breath, but Darius's words kept echoing. "You drink too, don't you?" He realized in that moment that what had been gnawing at him since the start of the appointment wasn't just Darius's liver numbers. It was the reflection staring back at him. Every word Darius spoke, every smirk, was like a tap on a mirror, forcing him to confront the truth, that he wasn't so different from the patient he was trying to save. A few weeks later, just as Ross finished his afternoon clinic, a call came in from the hospital's emergency department. "Dr. Ross, your patient, Darius Hill was brought in this morning. Blood pressure spike, severely elevated liver enzymes, preliminary diagnosis, advanced fatty liver disease. He's in special observation now. Ross set aside the chart in his hands and walked briskly down the gray carpeted hallway toward the elevator. In his mind was the image from that checkup weeks ago, Darius sitting back, talking about one drink a night with easy confidence, his eyes never quite meeting Ross's. The ER doors swung open. Darius lay on his side in the bed, his face flushed, sweat beading along his temples. A nurse was inserting an IV line, the monitor flickering with constant readings. When he saw Ross, he managed a faint smile. "Doc, just a little tired. Haven't been sleeping much lately." Ross glanced at the freshly printed lab results. Liver enzymes nearly double what they had been at the last visit. Blood pressure at a dangerous level. Pulling up a chair, Ross said, "Mr. Hill, we need to have a serious conversation. I'm advising you to quit drinking completely, starting today." Darius grimaced, trying to joke. "Quit drinking? You want me to give up dinner with my wife? We like to sip a little together, no big deal." Ross placed the lab sheet on the table, leaning toward him. "This is a big deal. Your liver is crying for help. Keep drinking, and you're heading towards cirrhosis, maybe even liver cancer. I'm not exaggerating." Darius stayed silent for a few seconds, then shrugged. "I'm not some drunk passed out on the street. I work. I run my company. I take care of my family. I drink in moderation." Ross started to respond, but something in the air stopped him. A sharp, cool scent, the strong, medicinal mint of antiseptic mouthwash. Ross asked directly, "What did you have before you came in?" Darius gave a small, not quite comfortable smile. "Just some antiseptic, Doc. We both know how to hide the things we want to keep." The words cut into Ross like a blade. He'd said it as if pulling Ross into the same circle. And the truth was, Ross knew he belonged there. He'd done the same thing. Down a glass or a few before heading home, chew a mint, rinse with mouthwash, and walk through the door looking like any other ordinary man. He could have said, "I get it," but he stayed silent. Not because he didn't understand, but because he understood too well. And because, how could he tell a man to quit drinking when he was still leaning on it himself just to stay upright every day? Ross rose from his chair, jotting a note into the chart. But just as he reached the door, he heard Darius murmur, half joking and half confessing, "You know, Doc, drinking's like carrying around an invisible raincoat.
At first you think it's only for when the storm comes, when you're stressed or hurting, but then you keep it on all the time, even on sunny days. And by the time you notice, you've forgotten what it feels like to stand under the sky without it." Ross didn't turn back, but the words stayed with him the rest of the day. That evening, after his shift, he went home. His wife was setting the dinner table, the warm smell of food filling the kitchen. But before stepping in, he detoured to the liquor cabinet, poured himself a small glass of whiskey, drank it quickly. Just one, he told himself. The second came before he even realized it. In the mirror, a man stared back at him, a white dress shirt, a slightly crooked tie, red eyes. He thought of Darius, lying in the hospital bed, mouth scented faintly of mint, and saw there wasn't much difference between them. Only today, it was Darius in the ER. Tomorrow, it could be him.
From the kitchen, his wife stood with her arms crossed, having seen him drink in silence. She didn't need to ask. Ross already knew what was coming. "Do you know what happened yesterday?" Her voice was even, but her eyes were sharp. "What happened?" Ross kept his tone calm, loosening his scarf and hanging his coat on the rack. "Our daughter went into the bathroom and found you asleep on the floor. She thought you were dead. She cried so hard I had to carry her out. Do you have any idea how terrified she was?" Ross stood frozen. In his mind, his 8-year-old daughter's face appeared, wide eyes rimmed red from tears. He started to say, "I was just tired," but the excuse sounded exactly like Darius's words in the ER, and he hated himself for that. That night, Ross lay in bed, restless. It had been a long time since he'd felt this heavy in his chest. Alcohol usually helped him dodge uncomfortable questions, but tonight it only made it clearer that he was running.
The next morning, he arrived at the hospital with bloodshot eyes and dark circles under them. Passing through the internal medicine waiting area, he spotted Darius sitting there. The sharp suit was gone. Instead, he wore hospital clothes. His face was tired, stripped of the confident polish he always carried. Ross started toward him, meaning only to nod in greeting. But Darius looked up, his gaze as if he'd been waiting for him. "Doctor, I think I need help." Ross sat down in the chair beside him. Around them, the waiting room filled with the background hum of hospital life, the loudspeaker calling patient names, the shuffle of nurses' shoes across the floor, the faint rustle of a newspaper from the corner. But between the two men there was a dense, unbroken silence. Darius drew in a long breath, eyes fixed ahead. "Last night, my son came to visit me here. He told me that a few days ago, he saw me drunk."
I was sitting on the couch holding a bottle and I couldn't even remember when I'd opened it. He ran over, shook me, thought I was dead. He screamed, "Dad," and cried all night. The next morning, my wife found him asleep next to the couch. After he told me that, I felt so guilty I couldn't sleep. Ross listened, a heaviness sinking into his chest. In his mind, his daughter's sobs from the day before rang again. The image of Darius clutching a bottle, eyes vacant, overlapped with the image of himself lying unconscious on the bathroom floor. He took a deep breath. For the first time in years, he spoke the thing he had hidden, even from himself. I had the same experience. My daughter found me on the bathroom floor. She thought I was dead. I'm a doctor, Darius. I save lives. But I'm also trying to find my way out of this. Darius turned to him, surprise flickering in his eyes. A faint, bitter smile touched his lips. "Then I guess we're more alike than I thought."
They sat in silence for a moment. No more words were needed. They both understood this was no longer a conversation between doctor and patient. It was between two men, two fathers, both successful in the world's eyes, yet rotting inside. Ross spoke quietly. "The other day, when you talked about that invisible raincoat, I thought about it all night. Maybe I've been wearing mine too long, so long I've forgotten what the sun feels like." Darius gave a small laugh, but his eyes carried a shadow. "The problem is, it doesn't rain all the time, and one day that raincoat starts suffocating us in the heat." Ross looked at him and realized those words weren't meant for just one of them, they were for both. He knew that if they walked out of here today and slipped back into their old rhythms, it would only be a matter of time before they saw each other again, not in a clinic, but in the ICU. Darius turned to him.
"You think maybe we could do something about it together?" Ross was surprised to find himself nodding immediately. Not as a vague promise, but as an unspoken pact. They would fight, side by side, against the thing that had been quietly stealing pieces of their lives. In that moment, Ross felt lighter. Not because he'd found a solution, but because he'd stopped staying silent, and looking into Darius's eyes, he knew he wasn't alone anymore. On a winter morning, Chicago lay under a thin veil of fog, the streetlights still pale even though the sun had risen. Ross stepped into the small cafe on the corner, where he and Darius had been meeting every week since the day they'd confessed the truth to each other. Darius was already at their usual table, hands wrapped around a mug of hot tea, the same drink he once would have mocked as water for sick people, but now treated as his new weapon against alcohol. "1 week without drinking," Darius said, not boasting, more like reminding himself. "Me too," Ross replied, and they both smiled faintly, the smile of men who knew the war inside them was anything but small. The early days hadn't been easy. Ross remembered clearly that first night after giving up alcohol, standing in the kitchen, staring at the whiskey bottle on the shelf like it was an old friend. A friend who had saved him from many sleepless nights, but had also been quietly pushing him toward the edge. He paced back and forth, his hand itching to reach for it, his mind screaming, "Just one glass." But the sound of his daughter's sobs from that day held him back. For Darius, the hardest moments came at work. Tense meetings, employee mistakes, stock prices dropping. In the past, he would pour a glass of brandy right there in his office, calling it a way to regain focus. Now, he replaced that glass with a bottle of water. He told Ross, "At first I felt like an actor cast in the wrong role, but then I realized the old role had nearly killed me." They didn't just meet at the cafe. Some nights, Ross would call Darius just to say, "I really want a drink right now." And Darius would answer, "Me too." But if you drink, I'll drink, so don't. Other times, Darius would text, I just walked past my usual bar. My heart's racing like I just ran into an old flame. Ross would call him immediately. Cross the street. I'll talk to you until you get home. Over time, these conversations became the anchor that kept them both tethered to reality. One evening, after a recovery group meeting at the hospital where they'd listened to stories of breakdown and healing, Darius said, You know what I've realized? I used to think freedom came from quitting alcohol, but really, it came the moment I spoke the truth for the first time. Ross nodded. He felt the same. The day he told Darius, I'm trying to find my way out too, was the day he stopped feeling alone in a dark room. By the third month, the cravings came less often, but the memories still lingered. Ross could still recall the warm burn sliding down his throat with that first sip of whiskey each night. Darius could still hear the pop of a brandy cork, like a personal soundtrack announcing his time to relax. They learned to replace those moments, Ross with evening runs, Darius by picking up the guitar again after 20 years. One Sunday afternoon, they attended a hospital fundraiser together. In the grand hall, the sound of glasses clinking filled the air, red wine flowing freely across the tables. Ross and Darius stood in a corner, each holding a glass of soda. They didn't need to say anything, just tapped glasses lightly. Ross looked at Darius and saw him smiling, really smiling. Not the polished grin for the media, but the smile of a man who knew he was moving in the right direction. And when Darius looked back at Ross, he didn't just see the doctor who had once saved his life. He saw a teammate, someone who had walked with him through his worst days without judgment. That night at home, Ross stood in front of the mirror. For the first time in years, he looked himself in the eye and saw no fog clouding the reflection. He realized freedom hadn't come from a single treatment or program. It had come from the moment he dared to face himself and choose to tell the truth. For Darius, the most valuable thing wasn't that his liver enzymes had dropped or his blood pressure had stabilized. It was the morning his son ran into his room, wrapped his arms around his neck and said, "Dad, you didn't pass out last night." That sentence, to him, was worth more than any multi-million-dollar contract. Both men understood this journey would never truly end. They would always have to stay vigilant, always have to remind each other when they saw the signs of slipping. But now, they no longer walked alone. Sincerity and walking alongside someone, Ross thought, are more powerful than any advice or treatment plan. A person could read hundreds of medical articles, listen to dozens of lectures, but only when they felt someone holding their hand through the swamp did they truly believe they could reach the shore. In a world where everyone tries to appear strong, sometimes the bravest act is admitting you're weak. And when you do, you not only save yourself, you open the door for someone else to begin healing too.